All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Jen. I'm going to ask just while we're talking to make sure you're muted just so that it can kind of keep noise clutter reduced. But then anytime you guys have questions, please definitely unmute so that we can chat through things. So my name is Jenn Lymburner. I am obviously a GMB trainer. I run a business. People are muted. I run an online business doing a lot of focus on body weight training and sustainable focus training. And GMB was just a really incredible value or incredibly valuable addition to my not only personal development on my own health and fitness journey, but as a coach as well. I do come from a gymnastics background. I was a high level gymnast and power tumbler and cheerleader, and then got into competitive CrossFit and Olympic weightlifting. And then just an accumulation of injuries kind of brought me back to my roots of bodyweight movement. That's when I got into more of the GMB method and really kind of started my journey to physical autonomy and sustainability. And body weight training to me is always just such a empowering way to support building areas like flexibility and mobility and strength. So it's been really nice to get to kind of dial back on that side of movement and now get to teach others to do the same. So I've been coaching for almost 15 years now, varying degrees of kind of gymnastics and bodyweight training, as well as CrossFit at various stages of my journey. So that's a bit about myself. Why don't we just, for the sake of kind of keeping things moving, I would love to even have you guys comment in the chat box if you're comfortable, just maybe where you're from and where you're at on your pull-up journey. So maybe just let me know, because I think even though this is an intro to pull-up session, I think there's going to be some of you that are maybe still working towards your first pull-up. Maybe some of you can do some reps and you're just looking to refine, or maybe you're dealing with nagging pains when you do some of them. So I'm just going to take a peek at the chat box in terms of who's here and kind of where you guys are at. But really my goal for this session is to treat it like an intro session, in that we're going to dive into kind of the benefits of pull-ups, technique for pull-ups and various pull variations, some accessory work you can include. So we will go through a little kind of prep session and some ideas for generating or building strength and mobility without it necessarily just being pull-ups. So we'll look at what you could do with weights and bands. And then we're going to do some Q&A time at the end. And as we go, if you have, again, questions that come up, I'm going to give you some opportunities to come on live so that you can ask questions kind of more face-to-face and conversationally. But as I'm talking, you can always use the chat feature and ask, so that I can always reference it as we go. So we have Amanda, pull up with toes on the floor, but not from a hang. Okay. We got Pittsburgh, 2 chin-ups from a dead hang. Doug, 21 upon a time. That's okay. Yeah, working back at it. That's awesome. Yeah, I know you had some shoulder surgery and challenges. Boston. We're going to pull it steadily. Awesome. Cool. So it sounds like some of you guys are rebuilding strength, or maybe like kind of in that few rep range and are looking to increase proficiency. So that's awesome. All right. So let's talk pull-ups. Pull-ups are an incredible skill, as you guys know, because in the process of working on a pull-up, you're creating so much benefit in other areas. So when we work on pull-ups, we are working on our shoulders, or strength in shoulders, lats, or our back, our core strength, our grip strength. When we think about the shoulder mechanics, we're working on improved mobility in our shoulders. Of course, working on them helps you improve that kind of brain-body connection and motor control and gets you just more body aware. There's a lot of value in one simple skill, but I think it's important to keep in mind that even though a pull-up may be kind of foundational or simple in that it's common, it's hard. Like, it's a hard skill. And so I always encourage on a pull-up journey to be really patient with the process. There are some skills and movements we learn over our athletic journeys that maybe come quick, and a pull-up might be something for some of you that happens a little bit slower. And so I think it's always important to remember that on your journey, be patient, be consistent, and really know that that consistency in working on some things that we're going to talk about is going to get you there. And your journey is your journey. And so just, trust the process and trust that it will come, and you're going to be better off really just letting yourself focus on quality and moving injury free and see that progress slower than feeling like you kind of go gung-ho and dive in and do too much at once. So when we talk about pull-ups and looking at the GMB method, assessment or assessing is naturally a really important starting point of any training program or any skills development. At the end of the day, you need to know where you're starting. What are your maybe strengths in the skill currently? What are maybe some of those weaknesses? Because unless you know or kind of are aware of some of those, it can be hard to properly address and focus on the areas that you need. So with pull-ups, there's going to be a few different things. And again, all this is kind of foundational, and some of it might be review for you guys, but again, jump in with questions if you need. So at a very base level, something like a passive hang is a really valuable assessment. Our passive hang is a relaxed hang. You guys may know this, where we're literally just hanging with shoulders, allowing them to shrug towards our ears, body relaxed. And when we use passive hang as an assessment, we're naturally testing your grip strength. For some of you at the beginning of your journey, it might be less about the strength in the pull itself, and it might be, can you even hold yourself on the bar for a set period of time? Do you have the flexibility overhead to hang comfortably, or have that ability to hang and let your shoulders and spine open without it being this excruciating, painful thing? So even just passive hanging in your routine, or knowing where you are from a passive hang perspective, is an important starting point. Let's say you're at 20 seconds right now, 30 seconds right now. Maybe over time, adding in little bits of passive hang throughout your days or every few days, you work towards that 60-second mark. 60 seconds or more is going to tell you that you're going to be fairly comfortable on the bar to be able to get at least some reps or volumes of the pull-up itself. And so that's one starting assessment point you can consider. Now, next is going to be your hanging scat pulls. In our scat pulls, which I'll talk about in a moment, we're now getting into that initial shoulder mobility and strength. When we do a pull-up, our shoulders need to move, right? They need to depress as we're initiating the movement. And so for anyone who maybe has limited shoulder mobility or spends a lot of time, think about posture-wise, sitting at a desk, rounded position, doing even that initial scat pull is a really important starting point. And so for some of you, it may be less about strength and more about your actual shoulder mobility and mechanics of your shoulders. So when we talk hanging scat pulls, it's the equivalent of, and I'll get on the bar and show you in a second, starting from a hang, letting shoulders relax towards your ears, and then thinking almost like you're tucking your armpit towards your pocket. We want to pull those shoulders down and back. And I really like the cue, just thinking shoulders away from your ears. Now, in order to do this effectively, we want to keep those elbows straight. So in the ideal scat pull, and sorry if the angle's not great, we are thinking about pulling shoulders down and back without those elbows bending. If you find that you're moving and your elbows are bending, but your shoulders, welcome Frederico. That's your sign that maybe some of that mobility and shoulder mobility is going to be one of the areas you need to address and focus and spend more time and attention on. And in the scat pull, you might find using feet assist, so keeping your toes on the ground, is going to be an important part of that process. Now, lastly, and of course I can dive into the mechanics of that a little bit more in a moment, would be just assessing a full pull-up, right? Where are you on your attempt? When I start with a new client, I'm going to always look at, I'm going to look at all three of these things. I'm going to see what is their grip strength, what is their ability to passive hang. I'm going to look at how are their shoulders moving. So I'll look at where are their scat pull-ups at. And then I'm going to look at the actual pull-up or pull-up attempt just to see where they're at. And when we look for using a pull-up as an assessment, and again, I'm going to talk more mechanics in a little while, what I'm looking for is, can they show reps with control? Because even that small adjustment, if I tell someone who's maybe already repping out pull-ups, I'd like to see some reps or whatever your max effort is with control, with our tight body positions, sometimes that in itself really quickly addresses strength, strength limitations. So for example, maybe some athletes, maybe you're in this boat, you can do a pull-up, but when you realize, or maybe you realize in the assessment process that really in order to do that, you're kind of flailing your legs a bit, you're really sticking up your chin. maybe even though on paper you can do the reps, being asked to do it with a little bit more quality and control might point out that there are some strength limitations, whether it's at the beginning of the pull or the end of pull, that might actually need more time and attention. So that being said, does anyone have any questions about this idea of using those as assessments? I know we haven't talked about like the how to pull up, but does that make sense to everyone in terms of having kind of a baseline for where you're starting? Thumbs up. Yeah, cool. All right. So, and conversational, if you guys want to be doing anything or trying anything as I talk, please feel free. I think it's important to address the differences between pull-ups and chin-ups. Because this is an intro to pull-up class, what I'll actually say is for most beginners, if you're really new to pulling, I actually typically recommend chin-ups as a starting point. It doesn't mean that never to work on pull-ups, along that journey, but a chin-up is going to be an underhand grip. So it's supinated, meaning palms are facing towards you when you go to grab the bar. It is going to be usually at shoulder height or shoulder width, maybe even a bit narrower. And we typically want elbows kind of right under our wrists. If you've ever done chin-ups and have kind of wrist pain or elbow pain, it could be just that you're going too wide and there's a kind of angle issue with how you're pulling that causes some of that pain. So that's just something to note. But typically, because a chin-up is going to allow for more use of areas like muscles, which for most people are more developed than, let's say, back, a chin-up for most people is actually where you're going to see you get more volume or get your first pull rep at the beginning of your journey. A pull-up, which we're going to do more of today, is going to be overhand grip. So pronated, that means palms down. We are going to typically be just outside of shoulder width, or you can start getting wider and wider. The wider pull starts getting more into lats. And in a lot, like unless you grew up, let's say, in gymnastics or doing certain training programs that teach pull-ups and integrate pull work into your routine, a lot of programs tend to bias like more push movements, right? So even going to like a standard Globo gym, you're probably going to see more set up for things like bench press than you would, let's say, a pull-up bar. And so for a lot of people, again, unless you've specifically been training it, lats tend to be an area that is a little bit weaker. And again, it's another reason why a pull-up can take a little bit more time to develop and build that lat strength compared to something like a chin-up. Neither are right or wrong, or more so better or worse. They're just a little bit different. Both can have a really or be a valuable addition to your routine. Is there anyone here who has been able to do a chin up but not a pull up yet? Like, does that make sense? But yeah, Kendall, yeah. And again, it's a good addition, and it's kind of like playing with both can be helpful. So we're going to dive into prep. This is an opportunity if you do want to get your body moving, not just sit there, you can certainly join in. So as we get into prep, just like anything you guys know with GMB, it's how do we get your body set up for the session ahead. So we want to be specific. Me just going out for a run isn't going to prep shoulders and back for a pull-up session. And so the first thing I'm going to show you is just a quick stretch. Typically, I would say we don't want to do too much passive work before a training session. So like passive stretching, I'm not going to have a client, let's say, just do like a 3-minute passive hang or just like a thoracic opener. Usually I'll add passive hanging after a session and do a little bit more kind of active or dynamic mobility first. But this is a good one that's a stretch, but it gets you moving a little bit. So this can be a shoulder and lat opener combination. So I'll show you it quick and then you can try it along with me if you want. So all we're doing is thinking about extending your arms straight with your thumbs up. You're going to let your chest drop. So you're in this nice extended position, feeling a stretch through your shoulders and spine. And after about 3 seconds, you're going to rotate out. In this case, I'm going to rotate to my left, meaning my right arm's going to be planted. I'm going to plant my left hand to my side and think about actively pushing my hand into the floor as my bum shifts back. I'm feeling a nice stretch all through my side body and lat. I'm going to hold for a few seconds, back to center, hold for a few seconds, and alternate. So if you want, give it a go. Even if you're not doing pull-ups with us today, this is just a good one for posture and helping open everything up. So if it's just a movement break for your day, it's still helpful. We're just gonna go for a few here. And I'm just trying to extend as long as I can. Really just try and open up and get ready for the hanging work coming up. The reason why, and it's going to be totally dependent on you, I might not do a ton of passive hanging before a session, is that I wouldn't want to completely fatigue grip. So some of the prep work I do will be non-bar hanging work just to make sure that my grip will last throughout the session. But next thing we're going to do are some lane W's. Maybe throughout your health journeys, you've explored various kind of Y, T, W-like positions. For today, we're going to do a Y variation. This can be done on the ground, on a bench, can be done standing. But the reason we want to do it is essentially we're mimicking and kind of getting our shoulders and back prepared for the action of the pull. So in the Y variation, I'll show face down in a second, we want to think about arms being around 90 degrees, thumbs up. And some people might just pull back. For today, you're going to think about not only squeezing your elbows up, but pulling down towards your bum. So we're creating this kind of downward elbow drive, squeezing those shoulders down and back. Now you can see how that is going to mimic that pull position and that ability to really get into that end range. So I'm going to show a couple reps and then you guys can join in. So I'm going to lay on my belly in this case. Again, you can do it on a bench or even standing. I'm going to think about thumbs up, arms around 90 degrees. And I'm going to squeeze my elbows towards my bum and then let them relax back up. Now, there's different ways of doing these, to be honest. There's slight variations that might change the nature of your letters, so to speak. But for today, this is the variation I would choose, again, to better mimic our pull position. So join in doing some reps if you'd like. We're just going to do about 30 more seconds here. You might find these fatigue, that kind of mid-back, pretty quickly. That's just good to reference and see how this movement feels. If this is a really big struggle for you, it might be a sign that that top range in your pull-up, it might be a bit of a mobility issue and something to add in a little bit more frequently. Good. All right, finish up maybe 3 to 5 more reps. Next thing I might do for a prep session is a little bit of a lat warm-up. So you can use a band. You can, if you don't have a band and had like a weight, you could also just do like a front plate hold or some front plate raises. So in this case, I actually really like this movement variation. Where did I put my PVC? Of course, if you can't do it with the PVC, you don't have to. But when we do a lat pull down, if you're not at a gym where there's a machine or like some sort of pulley system, what you can do is actually get your band set up and put a PVC through it. The reason I like this is because it will mimic you having to actually push down on a bar, which is what would happen in an actual pull-up. And I'm going to walk back until there's tension, keep my arms straight, pull those shoulders down and back, brace my core by pulling my ribs down, and think hands towards my hips. And again, this would just be a way to get those lats a little bit more awake before going in for your actual pull work. If you have access to a band and want to try a set of 10 to 15, you can. As you're doing that, I'm just going to talk. You can also do something like a single arm lat pull down. Again, a nice way to just kind of wake them up and get things warm before your pull-up work. Sometimes with pull development, we don't do a lot of single limb work. And so it's good to add in this type of training just to get some individual limb development and make sure there aren't too many imbalances going on. So if you did do single arm, maybe you do a couple sets of 10 to 15 aside, or again, with that PVC can be a great option. Just gonna move this. Joys of being short, always gotta climb over stuff. And then the last thing I'm gonna talk about with prep would again be the same thing I already kind of introduced at the beginning, which would be your scap pulls. At the end of the day, a scap pull, scap retraction, whatever you want to call it, bottom up pull, is really that initiation and warm up of the pull up itself. When we talk about, and a little bit more detail in the scap pull, we can start thinking about things like our grip, our body position. So when we do pull ups, something that's important to think about is knuckles to the sky. One of the biggest things I see in newbies is hanging from fingertips and kind of feeling like you're barely hanging on, and feel like I can't engage my lats because I'm like, and you're not sure why. Some of it may be that you're actually not hanging fully on the bar. Typically what I'm looking for is knuckles up, and if you can, thumb around. That's going to engage, well, it's just going to keep you more safe on the bar. It's going to give you more surface area, but it's also going to help you connect better through your shoulders and lats. So that's something to pay attention to. Even on something like a scat pull, or even some of your passive hang work, how is your grip? How are you hanging? The next thing we're thinking about is our body position. I'm going to talk in a moment about the difference between an arch pull and a hollow body pull, but for the nature of scat pulls, for right now, I'm going to encourage you to try a set that's at least neutral or slightly hollow. What I mean by that is you're doing a posterior pelvic tilt, so you're squeezing your bum and then trying your best to brace your core and pull those ribs down. So in a more hollow body scat pull, you're going to get those knuckles up, do that quick check. You're going to squeeze your bum, let those toes come in front slightly, and you're going to initiate by pressing down the bar, bringing shoulders away from your ears, up and down. If you cannot do this from hang, you'd put your feet on a box and use that assist. And for those of you who feel ready, what I would actually encourage is adding in from time to time in your prep some single arm scat pulls. Again, if all we're doing is two limbs, always doing two hands at once, it's a good opportunity to isolate and look for any imbalances. So a single arm scat pull could be done with your feet on a box, starting from hang, doing the same thing up and down. So using as much distance as needed, and over time, feeling like you can actually do a full scat pull from single arm would be another good assessment. I want you guys, if you have access to rings or bar, to do a set of 10 scat pulls. I'm just going to take a peek on video for those who want a quick review. If you don't have a pull-up bar but have something like a band, you could do something like an overhead pull-apart, where you're still working on the idea of kind of elevating your shoulders and then pulling shoulders away from your ears. This can be a nice variation to add in if even for right now you want to do something but don't have access to a bar. So let's everyone do a set of maybe 10 pulls or overhead pulls if you want. Good. Try and get those elbows nice and straight there, Doug. Think about what your core is doing. And really think about like an up and down movement. Shoulders down and back. Good. Head stays nice and neutral. And something to think about, because I know everyone's setup is a little different. For those of you who are narrow, like inside shoulder width, it's going to be a little bit harder to keep those arms straight. And it's naturally a narrow position is going to be trickier. So you might play a little bit. Obviously, with home pull-up bars, there's going to be limitations in where your width is. But if you feel like you're like, why can't I do this without my elbows bending? It might simply be that you're really narrow, and the narrower we are, the more flexibility and mobility required. And it may just be that that's something that is a reality for you, if that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Does anyone have questions about any of these type of prep drills before we move on to like more discussion on the actual pull-up mechanics? And you can always unmute if you have questions. I don't want anyone to feel like they can't.
Just a real quick question. So when you said knuckles up, it's like knuckles up, right? So you're kind of in this position.
Yeah, I mean, you don't need to be over, like, we don't need to quite get into like a false grip or like a hook grip, but it's more just the idea that the difference of, God, I don't know if it's gonna work, like hanging on fingertips like this versus that. Okay. So it's just a small adjustment up. If you get into more of a false grip, that's it's going to start getting into kind of false grip territory, which is more relevant to something like a strict muscle up. And you also have to typically think that just like in a false grip for like a ring muscle up, it's going to require more shoulder mobility. As soon as we start cranking the wrist, it's going to actually make it more challenging on shoulders. So play with what makes sense for you. But the biggest thing we're looking for is enough surface area on the bar that you are on the bar nice and secure, but also that you can, I like to think about a pull up less as like a pull and more like a press down. So we want enough surface area on the bar that we can actively like press into the bar. That makes sense.
Thank you. Yeah, thank
No
you.
problem. Any other questions before we move on?
Do you have an alternative for the band exercise if you don't have access to bands?
So I mean, anything that's going to get you working on scapular depression is good. Like even in an A-frame, doing something like the scap shrugs, you can call them. It's obviously inverted, but it's still working on some of that mechanics. Yeah, I sometimes will do something that's less like the banded, but sitting against the wall, I call them wall slides, where you're getting your back against the wall and actively trying to press hands and elbows into the wall and then slide up and down. Drills like that can be a helpful addition if you don't maybe have access to a pull-up bar or bands. So there's quite a few things. I think it's always just looking for, and even again, a lot of locomotion and a lot of what GMB teaches in terms of just getting those shoulders moving in more diverse ranges and having more mobility is going to make a difference.
Cool. Thank you.
No problem. All right. Before we move on to the full pull-ups, I did want to mention, and this is something you guys can play with for just a minute or two, the Frogger. So I think when we think of locomotion, we think a lot more, we don't necessarily correlate to something like a pull-up. The Frogger is actually a great option for starting to work on or to add in a little bit of kind of that core lat engagement without, again, it being a full banded or pull movement. So what you could do in a training session after you've done some prep is actually add in a little bit of play or add Frogger into your prep if you wanted to add some sort of locomotion. And the reason it can be helpful is that even though, yes, the squat is not completely applicable, the idea when we reach our hands forward is keeping our arms straight and pulling. So if you think about this less like I'm using my legs to jump forward and actually start thinking about it as like I'm pressing through the floor and trying to pull my hands towards me, which shifts my body forward, it actually starts becoming more similar in terms of that kind of lat engagement. So if I'm sitting in my squat, I'm reaching my hands forward, I'm going to think about rounding, so that whole body position, and I'm going to actively pull, and try and pull those feet forward. Again, you can see how now we're creating some of that correlation in terms of connecting to our lats and core a little bit more. So we're going to spend a minute or so, and I want you to just do some Froggers, but with the intention of how am I prepping my shoulders and back for a pull-up. So give them a go. Try and think nice and slow, over-exaggerate that kind of tabletop pull position. It's okay if you can't quite float, that's fine. Good. Try and tuck that bum down a little bit through that tabletop position there, Amanda. So think less bum up, think that kind of posterior tilt. Really think press through the floor, pull. Add as much lean as you can. Nice control there, Michael. Yep. That's it, John. Yeah, nice, Doug. There we go. You want to do maybe a few more, we can. Really nice. I'm seeing some great kind of hollow bodies and slow controlled pulls. That's beautiful. I can tell you guys practice. All right, finish up your last rep or two. And then we'll kind of dive into a little bit more of the nitty gritty of the actual pull up. All right, so mechanics of the pull up, what we should be working on. Like I talked about, there's going to be different areas in which each of you struggle. For some of you, it might be more bottom half of the pull. Some of you, it might be top half of the pull. There are differences in how to do a pull-up, and I think that's important to note right away, in that typically in more gymnasty type programs, so I know when I teach, I tend to emphasize a more hollow body pull throughout, from the start of the pull to the end of the pull. Now, you've probably done pull-ups before that are more arch. So, or maybe you've done them, you've seen them done before, and again, there's not a right or wrong way. There's different reasons to consider why you might do one over the other. In a hollow body pull, what I mean by the hollow body is I'm actively tucking that pelvis. I'm actively pushing down the bar and creating this hollow body. So a hollow body pull. It's going to transfer into more advanced calisthenic skills. The hollow body is going to transfer better into things like muscle ups, or for those of you doing things like the typewriters and kind of archer pulls, even things like rope climbs or like kind of L-sit rope climbs, L-sit pull-ups. The hollow body is going to transfer more into those skills. It's why a lot of coaches tend to emphasize that style of pull. Again, I know I tend to teach it to my clients because I know that those are often the skills that they're working towards. When we do a hollow body pull, because of this like kind of rounding in our spine and tension through our back, it actually lengthens the lats, and it's why it's harder to pull out of the bottom. So the bottom of a hollow body pull is actually going to be harder at the bottom, but easier at the top because of that slight angle in our body position. Whereas, and I hope this makes sense, I'm not sometimes not great at articulating these things. Whereas an arch position, so thinking about doing a pull where your ribs are extended, your anterior pelvic tilt, you're a little bit more behind the bar, tends to be easier. So maybe you've done pulls where you're like, oh, if I arch at the beginning, it actually feels easier because that shortening of lats and ability to engage lats more easily. However, at the top of that pull, because the weight's behind the bar, you might find the top is actually harder because now the weight distribution. So it's important to make that note that there's going to be different reasons. For some of you, maybe at the beginning of your journey or just really want to focus on the lats, maybe you do some work that's a little bit more arch and then progress towards hollow. Or there's what's called this kind of hybrid approach where you initiate the pull in the arch, and then as you get to the top, pull into a bit of a hollow to finish the pull. There are different ways to do it. And again, it's kind of what is your intention, maybe what feels right for you, because when we talk about movements, there's no perfect way to do something. There's lots of ways to do things depending on your goals, your body, and mechanics. And so that's just something to keep in mind. If you've been playing only with hollow body and you're feeling like, man, that beginning of the pull feels really hard, why can't I get it? It's because it is hard. It is harder to pull from that position. It will take more time and a little more consistency on that lat development. It's also why, and I know this is a comment in the questions in the actual event page, why is an L-sit pull-up so much harder out of the bottom? And again, it's that same idea of that extension or lengthening of the lats and that forced hollow body. When you're an L, you don't have any ability to compensate. Even with your legs extended, some of you, and I know sometimes I do it as well, there might be a bit of a rib extension going on to kind of help initiate. When you're in an L, the ability to arch is almost virtually impossible. Like is a lot harder because of the fact that your legs are in front. And so it's why something like the L is going to be a lot harder. Hopefully that makes sense. So something to keep in mind is just deciding where you want to be spending time and attention and maybe playing. Practice time in your training can be a really good time, as you guys know, just from working on other GMB programs, to just give yourself a chance to dial in on a particular skill. So movement variations for pull-ups. There's going to be different reasons for doing different types of movement variations. If you're struggling with the top of a pull-up, doing top of pull-up holds can certainly be valuable. If you're struggling with the bottom of a pull, doing kind of half rep bottom ups are really a way I like encouraging that work. So a bottom up, I know it's a little bit different than what Jamie calls it, would be what I call kind of a half rep, where you're working on connecting that idea of from the scat pull, just doing as high of a pull as you're able. What I tend to see in people struggling at the bottom is like the disconnect of, okay, I can pull through my scaps, but then nothing happens. And I almost like to say, or have you think about them happening a little bit more in unison. So a lot of people will pull and then kind of get stuck. The scap, when we go for the actual pull up, yes, we're depressing the shoulders, we're pulling down. but that elbow bend needs to happen almost in unison. It's like the shoulders start retracting and then we start pulling down. And sometimes that small shift can make it a little bit more fluid through that bottom position. And of course, there's going to be pull-up negatives where you can use a box, jump up, and control down, fighting through control through the very last end of the range. So with any of these pull progressions, use the assistance that actually makes sense for you to focus on quality. I know sometimes, and it's just on my journey, and I've been there myself, where sometimes ego can get in the way to be like, I really want to do the rep with no assistance, and then you kind of fight and compensate and body position goes loose, or you're overextending or not quite getting rep, like chin over the bar. You're going to end up feeling a lot more successful down the road, reducing injuries along the way, if you really allow quality to be, or kind of be at the forefront. And so it might mean choosing a feet assisted variation, or I'll talk about bands in a sec, to allow you to really focus on quality above all else. And so maybe at the end of a pull-up negative, maybe you currently dropped the last few inches. So maybe you're not actually building strength to the bottom few inches because you always just find yourself dropping. So maybe it's that you're doing jump up, control, control, control. And then once you get to the point where it's too much for you, just gently place those feet. And I'm still fighting. I can do pull-ups and that's still hard. It's giving yourself that assistance to just the parts that you need. Same thing with maybe from the bottom up. I'm going to get my toes planted, so they're just giving me a little bit of help, and I'm going to use them to help to that bottom range and then maybe finish the pull on my own. Or obviously doing pull-ups full range of motion with feet assist. So regardless of, the feet assist gives you control to help yourself where you personally need it. And I know sometimes with feet assist, because I do this a lot for like muscle up development with clients, it's like, well, it's too easy then. You have the power to control how much feet you use, right? Of course, if you're maybe just jumping up or doing this, it's not going to probably be getting you building that pull strength. But if you're going into it like, I want to imagine my feet aren't there, they're just giving me as much assistance as I needed, tell yourself you want it to be challenging, it's going to be challenging. And I do this a lot. I can do strict pull-ups, but a lot of time you'll find me doing assisted work, because even right now, these toes are giving me like a little bit of assistance, but like I have to fight to really pull. And so if you've been maybe doing feet assist work and still aren't feeling like you're making some of the progress, that might be a reflection piece of how easy or hard are you actually making it for yourself. A band can certainly be a valuable tool. I would say don't rely solely on it. So with a band, one of the biggest kind of limitations with it is that it helps out of the bottom. So it kind of gives you that extra assist out of the bottom, but not so much at the top, just the nature of how bands work. So if you were to do a banded pull-up, you might find it's giving you that assistance from the bottom, which is great, maybe not so much as at the top. But the same thing applies with this, is how much are you actually working? How much are you working on the area that you need? So if you're someone, let's say, who struggles at the bottom of the pull, you're like, I can hold okay at the top, but the bottom's really sticky for me. If you're only doing banded, well, it's no wonder you're not feeling like you're building that strength to the bottom, because this is probably doing more of the work on the area that you actually need more time and attention. For you, maybe doing the feet assist might be a little bit more beneficial in that process. And in terms of full pull-ups and movement mechanics, the last thing, again, I want to emphasize is kind of head neutral and really challenging yourself for that full range of motion, full hang at the bottom, and full chin extension at the top. If you're always, let's say, doing pull-ups and you're kind of doing just to get that last range, that chin extension, obviously, of course, it's still amazing, and we don't want to, take that lightly, but you're not going to be developing strength in that top few inches if you're never actually finishing that pull. And so if you're catching yourself kind of shorting the reps just a little bit, again, maybe it means regressing for a little bit with toes on the or an assistance just to really fight for that range, you might realize that it's actually a shoulder mobility issue, and maybe like your shoulders like I can't move down and back, I can't get any further, and doing some of those mobility and accessory work type drills that I introduced earlier might be a good starting point. So with that being said, if you would like to do, let's say, a set of, let's say, I don't know, 3 to 5 reps of one of the movement variations I introduced, like a top of pull-up hold, or kind of half rep bottom up, or if you want to do some full pull-ups, feel free to take a moment here to practice, and I'll try and take a peek. But this is also a chance for you to unmute and ask questions right now as well, if you'd like. I know I've just been talking a bunch, so I want to hear from you guys as needed.
So what would be the normal progression? I didn't think any progressions when I built these up when I was 20 years old. I just did them, did them, and did them, and did them, and did them. And that doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, for sure.
So I can do for sure with toes.
Yep.
Am I better to do negatives or half? You know, I mean, what? I guess that's, I need to reassess where I'm having problem with it, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. I mean, having variety in how you're training, I think, is always important. Like, I wouldn't necessarily say to a client, just do negatives over and over again. I think there's going to be value in working on different pieces. Maybe some days it is the negative and working on that control, because that's going to give you, like, when we work negatives, it's a great way to build strength through full range of motion with it. But maybe, you know, you alternate that with some top of pull-up holds where you're working on the top piece. Again, it's going to be dependent on trying to figure out where you think you're struggling most in the pull. And maybe, you know, one of the sessions is a little bit more full range of motion, whether it's negatives or feet assisted, like full pull-ups, whereas maybe another session is going to be a little bit more isolated or specific to your specific needs. And again, for some of you, that's going to be more top of hold. For some of you, that might be more the bottom up or kind of scat pull type work.
And we all know that we love to know about set numbers and all that stuff, and GMB doesn't want the stinking numbers.
I know.
So, but if we did whatever we're doing, we probably need to do at least a couple, or we're not really doing anything, and then take a couple of minutes and then do a couple more and then do a couple of minutes and a couple more. And so approximately 3 sets, sort of, you know.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I knew that was going to come up. And you're right in that there's not there's no way I can say blanketly that you guys need to do this many sets and reps. There is a link. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this. Where did I put it? On one of the GMB pull-up, and I'll just paste in there, blogs they do have a suggested reps game. Yeah, I found it earlier, so I like this to be something.
They hit it. Andy must have hidden it real well.
Yeah, right. Shh, don't tell them I told you guys. But as with any strength training, it's going to be about that kind of progressive overload, making it harder over time. So maybe for a little while you are just doing small sets, 3 sets of 3 to 5 reps. Maybe that is the fit for you, and that is hard enough for you. Like, that might be where your body is at. It's all about looking at where you're at and trying to add, whether that is building in volume, so increasing your reps or maybe sets, or it's increasing the challenge of the movements itself. Obviously, with body weight movements, we just need to make it more challenging by either choosing a harder variation. Maybe it is holding weight with pull-ups. Of course, you can always add weight, or doing more advanced versions like strict, like single arms. And so I'll always say, just like GMB talks about often, is this idea of auto-regulating and listening to your body. Because with things like pull-ups and calisthenics, well, obviously it's amazing and fun, and you know, I'm biased towards it because there tends to be so much shoulder and upper body dominance. Areas like elbows and shoulders need to be considered in terms of volume. So, like, on paper, maybe 2 to 3 days a week of including pull-up work might be a kind of average realistic amount of time, like kind of days to include pull-up work in a session. But for some people, that in itself might not be realistic, depending on all the other stuff you're doing. If you're doing a ton of other upper body work, or going rock climbing and doing all these other things, or a bunch of barbell work, like, maybe the volume for you needs to be low, and that pull-up progression is going to be a little bit longer, versus someone who isn't doing a ton of other, you know, stuff that could cause issues, and you can dial in on a little bit more volume. I know for me, I typically only do about 2 days a week of specific, or including specific pull work. Obviously I'm doing a bunch of other stuff, but I've had enough shoulder and elbow things over the years that like I've found kind of my sweet spot for volume and what is realistic for me. But a lot of that comes from that self-awareness and auto-regulating and just kind of paying attention to how your body's feeling, what your recovery is looking like. If you go into if you do decide to do pull-up work multiple days a week, you can't go into every session like with max effort kind of approach, right? You are gonna end up with injuries or issues. So it's kind of just being mindful and knowing that, it's better to start a little bit more gradually, see how your body responds, make sure you're building up correctly, and then look for like whatever kind of, I guess, progressive overload looks like for you in terms of, again, adding on a little bit of volume or making more challenging is where you kind of slowly start progressing. And I know that's not like a straightforward exact answer, but
everybody's different.
Yeah, exactly.
Jen, what do you think about grease the groove and how to implement that into your training? If you think it's valuable. Meaning like that style of training where you, like, let's say you're working on pull-ups and you're just trying to increase your volume. So rather than having it be like a number of sets and reps within a workout, you're like, okay, throughout the day, I do like 3 when I walk by the pull-up bar. And then I wait later in the day, I do 3 again. And then, so you're getting volume, but you're also getting a rest. I've heard it. There's some other term for it other than grease the groove as well, but that's the one. I know.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, again, if that is how you feel like you can manage more volume throughout a day and increase. I have actually personally never like programmed like that for a client or done that myself. So I don't have like real world experience, but I also know that there are coaches and programs that encourage that and that gives people results. So I think if it's something that you would want to explore, it's not going to hurt as long as you're being aware of, again, how your body's feeling and responding to it. The only other thing, I'm always like big on prepping body and making sure things are good. So that would be only concern for some people is maybe like, is jumping into certain skill work cold the best thing? I don't know. It depends on you and your body and kind of where you're at.
I've played with it, and I'm glad you bring that up because the lack of warm up was one thing that I noticed with it. I just kept it to like, let's say I could do 5 or 6 pull-ups. Well, I was working at a hospital and there was a pull-up bar. So every time I'd walk it, I would just do 3, really, and I wouldn't push it, right? I wouldn't push the envelope, so to speak, of like, and it seemed effective. It's just like, it's a very different way to train. And I haven't really figured out how to incorporate that, but I've been thinking about it because of my, I have 2 young kids. I got that has random hours, all this sort of difficult to, it's just been challenging to kind of like get in and stick with a program that at certain times a day. So
for sure. And I think that's a great, like, I mean, I would always talk about that in terms of if you have 5 minutes to throw in a little bit of the mobility work, like that's better than like feeling like you have to do a 30-minute session then not do it at all. So if in a similar way that actually works for you, I would say all for it, as long as, again, you're being aware of volume and how it's like what is within scope of not like completely burning yourself out if you're doing it every single day, right? Yeah. So I don't think it's a bad approach. Again, I know that's not an exact answer what people want to hear, but I think if it feels like it works for you and you're feeling the change that you want, that's it. Like if you're doing that and you're not seeing change, well, then that's a learning lesson for you to see, okay, well, is this really the right way to challenge myself right now? Or maybe it is that, you've reached a capacity for like, the volume is fine, but you actually need to start challenging yourself a little bit more in terms of maybe more holds or negative and kind of slow controlled work to start leveling up. Because it's the kind of that threshold of like how many pull-ups do you actually need to be functional and effective before you start just leveling up the challenge of the skill itself. Good question though. If anyone has questions right now, you can ask. I just wanted to make sure I don't neglect a few of the kind of accessory things and row variations, just support journeys, because pulls themselves, like we've talked about, is hard. And maybe, you want a little bit of variety in your routine to support it without it always being like a feet assisted pull up. Or maybe you have pull ups, but again, volume is the issue. Rings, as you guys know, most of you probably have access to some or have played with some, can be really valuable. And I just think it's important to also note the variety in how you can use these. So even like we talked about in terms of the pull-ups versus chin-ups, you can play with different things for how you're working on the rings too. So even a difference between a neutral grip, hopefully you guys can see it, more palms in, is going to be more reflective of kind of chin-up strength, in that it's going to be more bicep dominant. For those of you who want to get a little more bicep specific in your pulls, you could do your rows in a neutral grip position, and of course get more volume here than you would on the pull-up bar. If you do know that lats are a big focus for you, then I would always suggest doing more palms down pronated on the rings, where you're facing palms down and really having to, in the same way as you would on the pull-up bar, press down on the bar as you squeeze those shoulders or elbows down and back. And then, of course, there's the GMB reverse row sit back. Maybe you guys have tried these before. It's kind of like a combination horizontal vertical pull. It targets a lot of different muscles through your back and your shoulders, which is kind of this semi-combo pull where palms are in, we're thinking elbows back, and then dropping our bum, bringing hands inward, and then in the reverse. So I would always say rings can be, or should be, if you have access to them, of course. You can even do some of these things with TRX, a really valuable addition to your pull-up journey. And if you're not using them, obviously if you don't have access to them, that's a different story. But if you have them and aren't using them, I think it's something maybe to consider adding in a little bit more frequently. What I would typically do for a training session focused on pull-ups would be something like the prep you saw, and then my dedicated practice time would probably be on a pull variation that I think is appropriate for me on that given day, do a few reps, rest, really focus on kind of mechanics. And then in my push, I tend to choose something that might be a little bit more volume focused. So I might choose something like a ring row variation where I can get more volume than I'd be able to do on my regular pull-ups. Or even something like maybe you've determined in your passive hanging or just in your work in general that like grip strength is one of your issues. Outside from, of course, working on passive hanging throughout your days, even something with heavy weights like a farmer's carry and doing a grip related strength drill can be some good accessory work. And even though I know it's less GMB, doing some accessory kind of bodybuilding style work isn't necessarily a bad thing if it makes sense for you. Even something like a dumbbell row, if you know lats need focus, getting a nice flat back and not bicep curling it, because most of us don't need more bicep work, but thinking engage the back, pull that elbow a little bit further back and up. That type of accessory work is, yes, isolating movement, not typically what we want to do kind of full time, but it does have a time and a place in terms of giving you other opportunities to, let's say, develop some of that back strength. That's only going to support that. So you might do, again, some pull practice, and then as your push, throw in some accessory work, lat pull downs. I'm not going to, sorry, I know I'm talking lots. I also like movement variations where, with me, where you can work on your hollow body while doing pulls. And I know this one's a little bit trickier of a setup, and you could always just do it holding some light weights or no weights at all, is doing a hollow body lat pull down. I apologize, you can't see my full body. So get into hollow body and being able to maintain hollow through a lat pull down. Again, I know the set's a little bit tricky, but working on in your kind of accessory work, the hollow body work, lat pull down work, things that are challenging some of your shoulder and back strength in different ways, I think is really valuable accessory work and gives you a little bit of a break from always being on the bar doing with some of that grip strength. Sorry, I know that doesn't give you guys a chance to work on any of those things, but okay. So let's just kind of spend this next 5 minutes conversational. If you do want to show me something, you can. If you want to dive into anything that we talked about, anything that we didn't talk about, whether it's a specific movement variation, maybe accessory work, how to program, any Any questions at all? Or if you want to share where you're at and maybe talk through it, we can brainstorm together.
I got a quick question, Jen. If we're
Yeah.
working still on our pull-ups, is it better to use the bar or better to use the rings for our work? What would you recommend?
I wouldn't necessarily say that one is better or worse. You might have more flexibility. Like the rings and the movement of the rings can sometimes be helpful from a shoulder mobility perspective, actually. But I wouldn't, and you can play a little bit more in terms of positioning and kind of different positions in terms of hands. I wouldn't necessarily recommend one over the other, and maybe that's a little different than what GMB says, but I would say it's, with any style of training, it's not a bad thing to add variety and kind of play. So maybe some of your work is on a pull-up bar and one is rings, but if you only have access to one or the other, you can achieve, the pull strength regardless of equipment, very like options.
I actually prefer the rings because it gives you that little movement when elbows.
The rotation, yeah.
It gives you that little bit of inch if you need it.
Yeah. Yep, for sure.
Thank you.
I see some pondering faces. I'm sure someone has a question. Don't be shy.
I guess I got something I've been working on is my elbows, the medial.
Yep.
I guess epicondylitis, if you want to give it a funny name, right? Yeah. And I've noticed it, like, I don't know if you have any insight or things to focus on. I've been trying to play with just like the scap pull downs and keeping the pressure off my elbows, but I don't know if you have something like that's beyond just the bar or anything else. Yeah. Just
For strengthening elbow.
I have the same thing.
Yeah. I've had some elbow things over the year. I know, like, there's like even just kind of accessory work, like kind of like rotational work with dumbbells, that kind of stuff. I think I know one of the main GMB, who was it? I don't know if it was Ryan, actually has an article with some kind of like banded accessory work in terms of like some just accessory strengthening work. So I think working on kind of like accessory type of grip strength can always be helpful. Sometimes too, it's also, again, being aware of positioning in terms of where we're stacking like hands versus elbows. Like even something as small as like your hands being narrow, but you're really flaring elbows, or like hands wide, but you're really pulling elbows in. Like sometimes it might mean playing with your position in terms of, ideally we're trying to stay fairly kind of elbow under wrist to give you a better kind of stacking. So it could be that. I know I find I get that a little bit more on chin-ups if I'm not, sometimes certain grips I'm like, ooh, I can feel a lot more, and it's just the mechanics of like where wrist versus elbows are. So it might also just be playing with that kind of positioning a little bit.
okay.
So I was having an issue with the elbows, like you're talking about, like Michael was talking about, and I was just really increasing volume like very quickly, and now I backed off a lot, and I'm just trying to really much more gradually increase the volume. Do you think that will solve the issue I'm having with the elbows?
It can, and so certainly for a lot of people, overuse is like kind of progressing too fast, or like overuse is one of the issues that tends to happen with elbows. And so to your point, slowing down and making sure your body's actually ready is going to be helpful for sure. If it doesn't progress, that would be where maybe speaking to a physio or someone, because it could be an imbalance of strength. Like it could be mechanics of the actual movement in itself. It could be like an imbalance in strength or mobility. Like it could be a number of different things. So I would see how you respond to a more slow, gradual approach. That's typically gonna be better if you have had more of a kind of an overuse injury from doing too much too fast, and your joints and muscles not being ready for it. But if it continues, then it's speaking to someone if you need, who can kind of properly assess movement mechanics and things like that. And also just I always talk about deep health and rest and recovery. Also, again, looking kind of holistically at your training to see, yes, I'm working on pull-ups, but what else am I doing that might be impacting this? Am I giving my upper body in general enough rest and recovery to actually support the training that I'm doing? Like, do I need to take back off, or give myself more rest in general? So I think those are all considerations as well. Because again, it can be easy to kind of go in and do all these things at once, pull up work and work on handstand push-ups and all these other things, again, which are challenging some similar muscle groups, and then realize it's more kind of big picture what's going on versus just blaming a pull-up. All right. Oh, it looks like a man said there's a free guide on handstands that GMB has that also talks about elbow tendonitis and forearm. So thank you for sharing that.
It's free. It's free.
Yeah.
It's like grip, forearm, and they address tendonitis.
Perfect. Yeah, it's a common one in the calisthenics kind of world, just again to all the points that I talked about. So take a peek at that. I would paste it in if I had that link, but it's probably a pretty quick find.
That's the Handstand Factory. Is that Handstand Factory?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. You can find it on their website, handstandfactory.com. I'll see if I can get it.
Yeah. Perfect. All right, guys. Any other questions before we jump off? I hope that this was helpful. I know it's kind of a lot of talk and just foundational stuff, but hopefully everyone got a little bit out of it at least. And if questions pop up, just comment in the event page if you need, okay? All right. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.